Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Eden of lightcycleastrology.com. Today we're doing Mantic Monday episode number 30. We're taking a look at the astrology for this week ahead. I'm titling this episode A New Heroic Quest, and that of course is because the biggest feature of the week, astrologically speaking, is of course this total solar eclipse that is coming through on Monday in the sign of Aries. And one way that you could call this eclipse is also that it is a new moon eclipse conjoining the North Node, but it's happening in a Mars-ruled sign. So it's invoking that archetypal warrior. And of course, the sun is the archetypal hero. So we have this reset of the sun, this eclipsing of the sun that may be speaking to the inceptions of new heroic quests or missions. So that's part of the interpretation, I think, of this eclipse that is coming for us. We've already taken a look at this eclipse and talked about it in the last couple of videos. In part one, there was just one angle that we interpreted the eclipse in. Part two, we did horoscopes for all 12 rising signs. So if you missed that, you can check that out. But today, I want to look at this from a third angle. And this is from the angle of fate and free will, or fortune and free will. And this is because it has long been, since astrology or the divinatory arts, it has long been a topic of debate and speculation or belief. You have to make up your mind about how much fate is coming at us. And that essentially is what astrology is taking a look at, right? We're looking at the chart, we're looking at the transits, and we're saying, okay, what is coming towards me, or what is going to land in my lap? What kind of fortune, is it good or bad, is headed my way and is in essence outside of my control? That's the fate side of the coin. But then astrologers have always believes that there is some mixture, there is some amount of free will. There are some things that we can change. There are some ways that we can direct our lives. We have a certain amount of control over. And so fate and free will are always in this mixture. So today what I want to do is offer an interpretation on this solar eclipse in Aries from the standpoint of what might a solar eclipse in Aries represent as a fortune that lands in your lap, that is beyond anything that you caused or evoked or elicited towards yourself. It's just a kind of, it's a fortune or a fate that is coming towards you. What might that represent from the standpoint of fate or fortune, this eclipse? And also, I want to offer the interpretation of a solar eclipse in Aries, a very inceptual sign where Mars is the domicile ruler and the sun was said to be lifted up and exalted in this sign. The hero is on high. What does that speak to in terms of the kinds of motivations, the kinds of inspirations, the kind of desires or passions that are sort of welling up out of the soul and providing an image that is going to set you out on a new quest or a new journey? I think that that is part of this as well. And of course, there could be a mixture of both fate and free will that this eclipse is representing. So today we're going to take a look at that. We'll dive into a little bit of the Mars-Saturn conjunction and the kazimi, because that I think is part of the story as well. Before we get into this, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any of my videos. Leave some comments in the comment section. I love to learn what you guys are reflecting upon, the stories that you share. That is always so valuable to me and the community, and I appreciate all the comments. You can always visit me at lightcycleastrology.com. Send me a message, find out about readings that I offer there. That is where you can find out pricing and booking and techniques that we work with clients and all of that. If you feel like you want to get a hold of me personally, or maybe get some personalized guidance from me to take a look at something for you astrologically, that's where you can check it out, lightcycleastrology.com. Okay, well, as per usual, let's go ahead and we'll pull up the real-time clock, and you'll see that here is the sun and the moon coming together. This is a regular new moon. That's what an eclipse is at the heart, but a solar eclipse is at the heart, excuse me. One thing I mentioned a couple of videos back is that one really amazing thing about this eclipse is that it is happening in the 19th degree of the sign of Aries. And ancient astrologers gave each planet a sign that it would be exalted in, but it also gave a specific degree, just 1 degree within that sign that it was said to be exalted in. Now, we don't know much beyond that, or at least I don't. I've never heard anything beyond that. So I don't know precisely what that means, if there's a difference. Is it like extra, extra when the sun is in the 19th degree in Aries, or is it, how would you interpret that? I'm honestly not too sure. But what I do feel like is the right interpretation is to say, yeah, the sun's exalted in Aries, and this is happening in the exaltation degree. So it's extra special or extra, extra, right? As the kids say. But what does that mean if you're unfamiliar with exaltation? There are many ways to think about exaltation, but one thing or one way of viewing that is to think about it in terms of like the environment being very conducive for the nature of that planet. So for instance, if you're talking about Venus being exalted in Pisces, that Jupiterian watery place where Venus is traveling through is perfectly conducive. It's just the right kind of moisture and passion and optimism and hope and luck for art to spring forth effortlessly. It's somehow more important. It's lifted up. It's on high. It's very conducive to the nature of that planet to bring forth its natural significations. Likewise, the sun in the sign of Aries, it's very conducive for solar kinds of things to just come forth. The main reason that ancient astrologers placed the sun as exalted into this sign, of course, is because this is the beginning of the season of springtime. And it's at this time, once the sun crosses the vernal equinox, we talked about this a lot on this channel in the past. This begins the light half of the year. For 6 months from this point all the way until the beginning of fall time, there is more light in a 24-hour period than there is darkness. So ancient astrologers looked at this place as where the sun or the archetypal hero is victorious over the darkness. And darkness can represent like the past, or an enemy, or a foe, or a challenge, right? Something that's hard, something that's antithetical to life. Here is where the sun overcomes and bests and somehow is victorious over the darkness. And the sun will remain on that throne until the sun falls once it crosses the opposite of this place, the autumnal equinox, the sign of Libra, right? One way that I used to have these deep meditations when I was driving is that I would think about these two dichotomies between these two signs. There was one phrase that I heard that really stuck out in my mind, and it goes something like this. For Libra, the counterpart of the sign Aries, Libra is the sign where the soul enters the underworld and is judged or goes through some kind of judgment after death. And this, of course, ties back in with ancient Egypt, right, where they would, or they had the belief that once you died, the soul went down into the underworld. This is synonymous with the sun moving across the boundary where there's more darkness in a 24-hour period than there is light. So the sun was seen to have fallen into the metaphorical underworld, right? But the Egyptians said that the soul traveled down to the underworld and was put on the scale and was weighed against the weight of a feather on the other side. And this has to do with, did the soul live a good life? Is the soul burdened by the weight of sin or by the weight of regret or something along those lines, right? But the idea here was that the soul was weighed and there was some kind of judgment. There were mistakes, there were victories, what have you, but there was a tally, right? And of course, today, the symbolism for the sign of Libra is the scales. Well, if that's all really clear and easy to understand, but what does that say? How do you use that to define something opposite? The opposite sign is Aries. So what is happening with the soul if the soul goes down in the sign of Libra and represents the underworld, the weighing of something from the past, good deeds, all of that? What could Aries be about, being the opposite of those things? And for me, it sort of became clear that if Libra is the verdict at the end of the trial, Aries would be the trial. Aries would be the beginning of the trial. People come into the courtroom. There's arguments made. There's a competition between two sides, right? There's activity that is happening, and then you go through that process, and then it gets to the end, and then there's a final judgment. Well, Libra is the final judgment. Well, in order for there to be a final judgment, things have to be began. They have to be set out on. There have to be journeys or missions or deeds and actions that begin and run their course. So for me, Aries is that place where you go out and you begin a mission, you begin a quest, you have a passion, a desire, a dream, a motivation, a goal, and you have something that you're setting out forth upon. And you do so in this really tenacious way, this Mars ruled kind of way. Like, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to define individually what my quest is. That's very Mars, right? It's the image of the rams, fighting for mating rights, the right to mate with females and pass on their genetic progeny, right? But there's that whole going out on a mission and fighting for something, competing, taking up the challenge. It's almost like somebody hands you a video game that you've never played before, right? And says, how far can you get in this game? How well can you do? And then at the end, you're judged. You find out your faults, you find out your mistakes, you find out what you would maybe do differently. It's especially from the standpoint of, if you're believing in reincarnation, what would you do differently after judgment, right? And even beyond reincarnation, I've heard people talk about people on their deathbed having great clarity and understanding about what was really important. It's as if everything is rendered down, and you receive a download of judgment that gives you all of the knowledge. You're like, I did really good with this. I really messed that up. I would do that differently next time, or whatever. So fundamentally, for me, the eclipse is getting into this territory of the beginning of inceptions, the beginning of a mission, the beginning of a hero going on a quest. But first, the hero has to die, right? And that's the eclipse. The sun's light will become blotted out and eclipsed by the moon, a disruption to the storyline, a disruption to the direction that you're heading in, or something along those lines. And so we're going to take a look at interpretations, both fate and fortune, here in a second here. But this, for me, is a deeper look at the eclipse in Aries, what it's maybe getting at. Now, if we roll the real-time clock forward, on Wednesday, Mars perfects this conjunction with Saturn that has been building over the last week. And this, of course, is really important to the story of the eclipse, because Mars is the host of the eclipse. Mars is hosting the eclipsing planets in his sign. And as he is hosting this event, Mars himself is meeting up with Saturn. Now, of course, Mars and Saturn were the two malefic planets ancient astrologers ascribed, right? You have Mars being something like anger, challenges, strife, war, fighting, things like that. You have Saturn being limits and obstacles and incarceration and enslavement or challenges, duty, kind of that heavy stuff, right? So these two planets are getting together, I think, painting a picture of what's happening with the eclipse as well. And then on Friday here, lastly, we get the either late Thursday or Friday, we get the kazimi, which is also an amazing part of the story. When Mercury, which is retrograde right now, meets up and moves onto the heart of the sun and then passes over the sun. And this was the moment that was said to be the sort of aha moment of understanding, or the clarification of ideas or communication, or the rendering of a process about what the retrograde was redoing or reworking or something like that. So yeah, you put all these things together, it's just like, wow, right? But let's take a look now at the two ways that you could interpret fate and fortune. So we have the North Node new moon eclipse in Aries, a new heroic quest, and fate. How could this eclipse be representing a kind of fate that just sort of lands in your lap, beyond anything that you have brought unto yourself or anything you've elicited, anything that you have control over, something that is just not within your control? I think it's something like a narrative change. You go to work one day and you find out that the company has been is in the process of going bankrupt. Or no, I'm not trying to say anything scary or negative, but yeah, I'm just giving you an example of that. You have nothing to do with that, right? If something happens at work that the company decides, and you're just an employee, that you don't have any control over that, right? But somehow the narrative changes. A boss does something, or the owners do something, and it's kind of like there's a twist in the narrative or a change in the plot line, and that sends things off in a new direction. Now, with solar eclipses, again, the solar symbolism is about leaders, bosses, CEOs, important people, famous people, solar characters that are kind of like the sun itself, right? The center of attention, or the king, right? It's like the king decides something and that affects your life somehow. There's a twist in how things were going, and now something has changed, or it's heading in a new direction. But that is definitely one way in which a solar eclipse can represent a kind of fate that comes along, right? And it tends to be about how does that change the direction that life was heading in. Now, it might not be changing your whole life. It might be just changing an aspect of a certain part of life, right? And oftentimes it can sometimes connect to things like father or important people in your life, or important friendships, something like that. But that is sort of the fate side of the coin for this eclipse. Now, I think a little bit easier to suss out here is the free will side of the coin, because, again, the eclipse in Aries, this inceptional sign opposite to Libra, a place that is Mars ruled, exaltation of the sun, is speaking to free will, maybe being the instigator, the person that is acting upon emerging inspirations or emerging motivations or ambitions, images that sort of are coming out of the soul that weren't there before, or at least maybe was beginning to be there, but are suddenly more strong now. Those ideals, motivations, ambitions, desires, it's as if the time is right for them to bloom and blossom, and they flood up from the soul, or wherever you think the soul is. They flood out from the soul, and they permeate you, and you're the one that heads off on a new mission, takes up a new quest, changes something in life, and acts upon your environment with free will. That's another way that you could see that. And I think that's really clearly, easily seen from the fact that this is happening in Aries, this very inceptual Mars exaltated, solar place, right? So that's an important way to look at it. Now, if we look at Wednesday, the Mars-Saturn fate coming through. And again, Mars being the host of the eclipse. Of course, you could see the usual, the things that sort of are outside of your control, just sort of landing in your lap. The obstacles, the misfortune. And it doesn't have to be big, giant misfortune. The car not starting and you're late for work, or, and now you have to, on the fly, get a hold of a Uber, and all these trickle effects that come down. The Murphy's Law day, the kind of things just being delivered to you in a way that makes you struggle. You're just overcoming, you're working, your back is sore, things like this being delivered to you. But also limits, of course, right? We have Saturn representing archetypal limits that we come up against, walls or problems that land in your lap. And then I would say almost guaranteed that frustration, no matter how this Mars-Saturn conjunction plays out, one fate of that is that there will be frustration, right? There will be some level of frustration that is pretty 99% of the time when you get Mars and Saturn coming together in any aspect, there's gonna be some kind of, just gnashing of teeth, frustration as you're trying to overcome whatever it is that seems to be running into the wall. So that is the fate side of things. And then you get the free will side of that. What is that? Well, you get the more productive or positive look at this, and you might have a strengthened discipline, strengthened maturity, good sportsmanship. I like that, because we are talking about this Mars-Saturn conjunction happening in Pisces, a Jupiter-ruled sign, a sign that is benefic, right? So you get the notion of like, well, there's determination, there's hard work, there's grit, there's tenacity, there's maybe patience met with the determined tenacity of Mars coming together, maybe slowing Mars down. Maybe there's still frustration. There's probably still pressure in the engine that's really heating things up, but there is hopefully the better nature of, what is it, the angels of our better nature rise up, and we meet the challenges with like a good sportsmanship kind of a thing. And the frustration's there, but we can somehow practice and do our best to handle the frustration in a non-destructive way, because we'll feel it, right? We most likely are going to be feeling that pressure. But it's sort of knowing that you can get through it, believing in yourself, all of those kinds of things. That is also a part of the energies of Mars and Saturn together in Pisces, I think. So it can go both ways. It can sort of slip into the woe is me, all is lost pessimism, where anger wells up and you don't handle frustration well, or it can be the more hopeful, optimistic, good sportsmanship kind of attitude that sees you through. So both of those are possible with this, but it's kind of in the realm that this is playing in. And of course, this may tie in with the potential for changes from the eclipse, or passions that are coming in from the eclipse. And then the Mercury kazimi coming through at the end, really sort of the part of the story that's coming in the sequence here at the end of the week, is the fate, right? We have, or the fortune of clarity that just is there. It wasn't, and all of a sudden the clouds part and you can see again. There's vision, there's clarity. That is also something that I believe is outside of our control. It just seems to happen sometimes, and you can't choose it. If you could, you would be like that, what's that movie where Bradley Cooper takes the drug, and I forget the name, but the drug makes him smart, and all of a sudden becomes a millionaire, plays the stocks and all that stuff. If you could choose that kind of clarity, you would, right? The mind settling down and becoming calm that leads to the insights, but also messages and announcements. A big Mercury kazimi thing is definitely messages or announcements that come along, the announcement of something happening at work, the announcement happening by our father or something like that, that comes down and is really important, carries a very central, important, weighty message or announcement. That is the fate side of things. The free will is our ability to research or learn about the course of action that we're going to take, sharing, not holding back, defining something with somebody, or letting somebody know something, or hearing what other people are going through, or something along those lines, but sharing or exchange, talking. Mercury is also a planet of children. So it's like finding out, like, really tell me what is going on. I really want to know how your day was at school or something like that. Really trying to understand, learn, being proactive with sharing or communicating with people, exchange. Exchange can also be investments or an exchange of commodities or anything like that. And it could have, again, kind of that action oriented kind of way where there is, like, for instance, if you have an athletic practice, the kazimi could represent a breakthrough in body mind connection movement, where it's like all of a sudden you have a breakthrough. Oh, I know how to make this move or to do that, or to, you know, um, do whatever that is kind of like a breakthrough physically and mentally all at the same time. So in athletic scenarios, you get something like that for the kazimi. So that is the story. I'd love to hear your guys' reflections on this and what you think. Go ahead and drop them in the comments for me. We'll be back again with another Mantic Monday episode next week. Until then, stay safe, and hope you guys all have a great week. Bye for now.